The Jermaine Burton hype train is building, but I think we still are in the position that we'll believe it when we see it.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Jake Lisco. He's James Rapine, and we've been covering the Cincinnati Bengals here on Locked On Bengals since 2016, making it your best, most consistent place to find Cincinnati Bengals news and analysis all year round. You can hit that subscribe button if you're not already an everydayer. That makes it really easy to join the many of you we appreciate so deeply for making Locked On Bengals part of your daily routine. And all of you that make Locked On Bengals your first listen and have built those good listening habits, well, we love to encourage those as well. Today, James, we dive into whether we're buying or selling the Jermaine Burton offseason hype. If you Google Jermaine Burton's name right now, you'll see a number of videos and articles and fantasy posts about Jermaine Burton impressing throughout training camp. And well, we'll believe it when we see it. We'll talk about why. And then there are changes coming to the Bengals Ring of Honor process that we'll dive into in today's episode, in addition to this year's crop of candidates. But James, let's start with Jermaine Burton. And honestly, my first question here that I've talked to you about a couple of times in the last couple of weeks is, where is this hype coming from? Why are so many people talking about this Jermaine Burton breakout season? So let's talk about that first and then dive into where our expectations are for the Bengals second-year wide receiver.
Well, where are they coming from? I think it's a mixture. One, any NFL fan that pays even half attention knows that usually good players make a huge leap from year one to year two. So that's one. Two, if you look at the guys that could make just a huge impact and kind of change the game, yeah, you're going to start offensive line, you're going to start pass rush, but it's June. We've talked about those things for months and months and months. Can you imagine what happens if Jermaine Burton becomes the field stretcher that he showed at times last year, finishing with 4 catches, but those 4 catches went for 107 yards. He's averaged 27 yards per catch. It's an interesting thought to envision Jamar Chase being triple crown Jamar, T. Higgins in the prime of his career and doing what we saw him do last year when he was healthy, plus a field stretcher like Jermaine Burton who complements Andre Yosevich and Mike Gesicki very, very well. Like, I think that's it. I think that's where the hype is coming from, because it's like, man, he does have talent. I think everyone agrees he has talent. And if he does figure it out in this offense, where he doesn't have to be the 1 or the 2, but has a potentially elite skill set. I don't think it's there yet, but an elite skill set potentially if he reaches his full potential in year 2, how much that could do for this offense. And I do think it could matter. So I think that's where the hype is. You haven't heard his name in any of the off the field stuff, evictions, all of those things, get issues like that. We obviously haven't heard him showing up late. You combine that with, and I did this during draft week. I said it on the pod, like, Jermaine Burton's in the building. So you combine that with the hope of what he could bring if he reaches his potential as just a nice complementary weapon. And I think that's where the hype in the Jermaine Burton breakout hype train, I think that's where it's coming from.
Yeah, if he realizes his potential, as we said all of last year, if he can get his act together and focus on the things he needs to focus on and stay on the field, and like I said, put together on a consistent basis the traits that he showed when he played well in college, when we saw the flashes from him on the field in Cincinnati, of course he can be a good player, but I guess my confusion was like, what prompted this sudden change of belief? Is it just time and time passing between the negative offseason reports that had fans ready to cut and move on from Jermaine Burton before free agency earlier this year, in winter of this year, February, March, people ready to move on from Jermaine Burton altogether. And then you haven't heard about it for a little bit. And now you get people asking Zac Taylor about Jermaine Burton, people asking Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow. How's Jermaine Burton doing? What's he doing differently this year? Has he handled things differently? Or are these things happening? And you're getting some positive remarks from his teammates, from his coach, because those guys are generally going to back Jermaine up in public. They even did last year when he was going through it. Really, the only guy that hasn't is Duke Tobin when he was asked about Burton, saying that Burton hasn't done anything to deserve to be on the team. But Zac Taylor said he thinks he's done a good job of handling the present this offseason. He's been in the building. He's been in the building outside of work hours, pre-having to get his body right. He's attacked practice the right way, and that is what you can control right now. And so Zac Taylor appreciates that bit of approach. And that's me reading from Jay Morris's reporting over at BengalsTalk.com. But Burrow also said he stepped up this year so far. He's taken it very seriously. He's matured, it seems like. That's exciting to see based on conversations we've had. He's in a good spot mentally and physically. He's been working hard, which is exciting to see. So I think these quotes and these guys being asked about Jermaine Burton contributes as well, right? Because we've talked about the wide receiver depth behind those three guys. Andre Yosavash being 3, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins being 1 and 1A, 1 and 1B, whatever. But then if Jermaine Burton can take that leap and can be that piece, then it is exciting. And I get that. But I guess my disconnect is like, what makes us believe that is happening? Is it these quotes? Because I personally, based on what we saw from him in year 1, I'm still in a place where I need to see it. And I hope he does it. I really do. Like, I would love for that to be the story of the preseason going into the year. Like, Jermaine Burton's been disciplined. He's forcing himself onto the field. He's going to eat the Andre Yosavash's playing time or Mike Gesicki's playing time or whoever it is. He's out there blocking hard. Like, I want to be having those conversations about Jermaine Burton. That would be great.
It would be. And it's, if you did the, we've talked about where can they get better? The receiver room, if Jermaine Burton is just a quality deep threat. Let's take everything you mentioned, blocking and stuff, and that obviously helps him get on the field. But if you could just be a quality deep threat that plays, I don't know, 20% of the snaps every week, but it's enough and it's impactful enough to matter when defensive coordinators are game planning for the Bengals. Well, that's just going to suck for defensive coordinators because there's a whole hell of a lot to worry about already. Mm-hmm. And so to give that, like, no one really thinks, like when you think about the Indianapolis Colts, you don't think of Alec Pierce, but he's a deep threat and he's consistent and he gets open and he averaged, had a crazy year last year, over 800 yards, but he averaged 22 yards per catch. I think that's it, is if you have this guy that can be this awesome deep threat that is just so comfortable, laid hands, comfortable, downfield, one-on-one, that's what you're going to get if you're Jermaine. And I think that's why they were so interested in why they ultimately did pick him, is because of how well, from a football standpoint, it could fit, it could mesh, and the potential and the ceiling. And so you decide to keep T. And so now it's like, all right, well, Jermaine, you don't have to be a star. You don't have to be wide receiver 2. But can you complement these guys? I don't even need him to be wide. Me personally, I think Andre Yosavash is going to be wide receiver 3 this year, or Mike Gesicki or whoever. I don't think Jermaine beats out those guys. And that is not my expectation for him. But if he it can be a deep threat that complements those guys, I think that's a win. And I think a lot of people will view that and say, are you serious? And yeah, I'm serious, because I think Andre Yosavash is probably going to be better this year than he was last year. I think Mike Gesicki is certainly going to have more than the 2 touchdowns he had this year. And maybe the receptions go down a little bit, but I think the touchdowns are going to go up. So I think those guys are going to be big parts of the offense for obvious reasons. But can Burton be active every game? Can Burton matter enough for defensive coordinators to talk about him and have to game plan a little bit and say, hey, we gotta be aware of where 81 is because he can beat us. If that's the case, I think that's a win.
And that's why I'm talking about him challenging for snaps, not challenging to take those guys off the field. I'm saying like 5 snaps a game. And that's why I'm talking about blocking too. If there's a way for Jermaine Burton to get onto the field, it's to care a whole hell of a lot about blocking a wide receiver. And being able to do that, and think about that, what you can build off of that. If he's your, like, we need to take Jamar Chase off the field for a snap, or T. Higgins off the field for a snap, we're going to run the ball. And instead you have Jermaine Burton in that role. And now you can run play action off that with Jermaine Burton's deep threat ability.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Now we're cooking. We're cooking.
And it like you said, it gives the opposing defensive coordinator something to think about. We'll be watching Jermaine Burton closely. If you had to put a list of the top X factors for the Bengals, and this will be an episode we do this offseason, Jermaine Burton near the top of that list, I think, for X factors that could really push the Bengals season in one way or another. That's enough on Jermaine Burton. Let's transition. Let's talk about this Ring of Honor. The Bengals have their candidates. They have announced some changes coming to that system. We'll dive into that topic coming up next.
As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. And that's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn can make it easy to not only post your job for free, but share it with your network and get qualified candidates all in one place. Here's what you do. You post your job, and LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And use the hashtag hiring frame on your profile picture, and you'll double your reach. It's that simple. Plus, 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high-quality hires. Join the LinkedIn Jobs movement by posting your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
Now, those of you that don't know, James Rapien has written a book about the Cincinnati Bengals and their history. And so while he isn't necessarily the guy that's been watching this team for 60 years and knows about some of these players from personal experience, he has done the work to learn about their impact on the Bengals. So, James, when you think about this year's Ring of Honor class, let's start here. The list of candidates and the conversation we have every year when we talk about this is all these guys deserve to be in.
Yep.
So it's kind of a matter of time. And that leads into the discussion, like, are changes coming to the process? What does the future of this look like? The Bengals talking about sustainability. But let's first talk about the players eligible for this year's Ring of Honor class.
Yep. And there's they're all deserving, like you said, and I'm just going to go in alphabetical order. Jim Breach, James Brooks, Chris Collinsworth, David Fulcher, Dave Lapham, Max Montoya, Lamar Parrish, Bob Trumpy, Reggie Williams, and all guys that, if you look at it, should be in, hopefully will be in. And the Ring of Honor game set for October 26th, by the way, the first 1:00 Ring of Honor game, which shout out schedule makers for not giving the Bengals more than one home primetime game to make the Ring of Honor at night. Instead, it's going to be in the middle of the game against the New York Jets. By the way, I've already been to a Ring of Honor New York Jets game, and that was when the Bengals played the Jets in 2021. Nick Mangold was inducted into the Jets Ring of Honor, just to give you an idea. So how about that? This will be the second New York Jets Bengals Ring of Honor game, just flipped. Look, all of these guys should be in. I think it gets really tough when you split hairs here. One, I think Lamar Parrish is going to get the most votes. I think he's in. Just talking with people that have already voted, I would expect Lamar Parrish to be in. And no argument from me. I thought he should have been in last year. But then after that, and what makes it tough is Dave Lapham. When you think of the Bengals, everyone thinks of Dave Lapham because of his analysis, because of what he's represented, because of how he's represented the team, because when he was a player, he was able to play all 5 spots along the offensive line. You talk about versatility and how much that meant. Like, there's been so many years. You want to talk about eras. He's been a part of virtually every Bengals era and knows all of the all-time great Bengals and all of those things. And so I think Dave Lapham is someone people are going to vote for. And what's tough is, and by the way, he should be in. I think that's right. But what's tough is if you look at it from a player perspective, you could, and I would make the argument Bob Trumpy should be in. I would, I think he's the best tight end in Bengals history. James Brooks, everyone crowns Corey Dillon because no one remembers James Brooks. There's a really good argument that James Brooks is the best running back in franchise history, not Corey Dillon. And some will argue that and be mad and roll their eyes. That's fine. But there is that argument. And by the way, I would love to see prime James Brooks playing with Joe Burrow, because that would be one of the best tandems in NFL history from a quarterback running back standpoint. So all of these guys deserve to be in. It's going to be really, really tough for season ticket holders to vote for two. And usually when they do, and this is part of the process, when I see the two they vote for, I always say, yeah, but, or, and I don't have a vote, obviously. So I don't have to worry about it from that perspective. But I think it's a really, really tough call because you're limiting yourself to two. And especially if you think about the ages of some of these guys. Bob Trumpy, 80. I believe he's 80 years old now. Would love for him to be in this year.
He is 80. And some of these guys that have had injuries catch up to them and now deal with the aftermath of playing football.
Reggie Williams, yeah.
Reggie Williams coming to mind for that one. And it's just the Bengals making it tough on the fans, right? Like, it's really great that they're finally doing this. And it's the same conversation we have every year, like I said. But if they had just started by backloading it or catching up, back pay for Ring of Honor, that's what I'm thinking of here. Sure. Like, just get your guys that have been waiting forever, that fans that, especially new fans, like, they don't know who Bob Trumpy is unless they're really digging into history. They have your history book on the Bengals, right?
Enter the jungle. Bam.
Yeah. And you can go check that out if you're looking for that history. But like, they might not even know who Lamar Parrish is. You do a survey on like add a prime Bengal to this year's Bengals team any year, and people will answer Max Montoya. And well, I don't necessarily there's a lot of guys, and you're talking offensive line, you're probably talking Anthony Munoz, Willie Anderson there. But people really think that Max Montoya, given your need a guard, will make a huge difference on these Joe Burrow era teams. And they're probably not wrong. Prime Max Montoya. Absolutely not wrong.
No, they're definitely not wrong.
And so you get into these situations where, like you said, it's splitting hairs every year over, do you go with the most deserving in terms of like Hall of Fame? Who has the strongest Hall of Fame case, even if none of these guys are necessarily Hall of Famers? Do you go with the guy that's done so much work around the Bengals image and Dave Lapham, like you mentioned, and also was a great player for a long time for the team, has continued to stick around, be an employee, work in media with the team. It gets really difficult. And so I don't really fault any votes at this point. I understand a lot of different thought processes and that sort of thing. I'm very interested to see what the process changes look like and how that shakes things up going forward, what their plan is there. But who are the two? Did you say your two if you were voting?
I would vote. It's funny. My two this year are the same as my two last year. I wouldn't have voted Corey last year. I would have went and I know that's controversial because he had the most votes, spoiler. But that's why I mentioned him. I would have Bob Trumpy and Lamar Parrish. Probably not in that order. I'd go Lamar and Bob. And it stinks because you're right about Lap. And it's really tough. All of these guys deserve to be in. So I'm not going to argue when it probably is James Brooks and Lamar Parrish. I think those are the favorites, but I would go Trumpy and Parrish.
And then it's like, okay, let's
Lap. Sure Lap's the other one. I think Lap gets in this year, actually. Sorry.
And then let's make sure those other two guys get in like immediately thereafter, right? And if it goes down to one guy, and next year you're talking about James Brooks and Bob Trumpy, or Lap and Trumpy, or Reggie Williams and Max Montoya, or whatever it is, like, it's like, man, tough decisions to make in terms of the order here. And you got to think about where these guys are in their life, I think. I think that at some point has to be a part of this. But you're asking a lot of people to think that way. And so we'll see how those votes shake out. What's more interesting, perhaps, maybe not more interesting, but very interesting nonetheless, is these potential changes coming for the Ring of Honor process. Let's talk about what that might include coming up next.
Jake, when the Bengals made the Ring of Honor news official and they announced that it was set for the October 26th game against the Jets, they listed the 9 players and then all the inductees that have already been in. Obviously, Ken Anderson, Willie Anderson, Paul Brown, Isaac Curtis, Corey Dillon, Boomer Esiason, Chad Johnson, Tim Crumry, Anthony Munoz, Ken Riley are the ones that are already in. But then they followed it up with this paragraph. This is the 5th year for the Bengals Ring of Honor, which is an important milestone to reflect on the tradition. After this year, the Bengals will review and explore ways to reshape aspects of the Ring of Honor to ensure it remains relevant and sustainable now and into the future. More information on potential changes will be announced next year ahead of the 2026 Ring of Honor voting. And so changes are coming. It's interesting because really since year one, probably year two is probably when this really set in. It's like, yeah, can we tweak it a little bit? Can we tweak it and make this where you catch up or you find a way? I honestly like the idea, at least on the surface, of having a legacy inductee or maybe two to catch up, and then one of the modern inductees. Like Bob Trumpy should have went into the Ring of Honor when Max Montoya was still blocking for the Bengals. Like just to give you an idea of where we're talking. Lamar Parrish should have went in when Corey Dillon was suiting up, or certainly around that time. Dave Lapham probably should have went in, I don't know, mid 2000s is probably when he had established himself as Mr. Bengal, as I would call him. So you're playing catch up with a lot of these guys. And yet at the same time, Corey Dillon, of course, deserves to be in. But James Brooks would have went in 20 years ago. Chad Johnson, of course, deserves to be in. And they got this one right from an order standpoint. But Isaac Curtis would have gone in while Chad was still a player, maybe when Chad was a rookie or before Chad was in the league. So I think that's the balance now, because you have 9 candidates. After this year, it'll be down to 7. Do they skip years? Do they add candidates? What do they do? Changes are coming. And I think they need to happen. But the answer is, how do you make it even? How do you make it fair so you do get the Bob Trumpies of the world? And I don't think Bob is getting in this year. Get him in at some point, because he's 80 and will be 81 next March. So that would be a priority for me if I'm the Bengals.
I just think they're talking about sustainability. They're talking about relevance, right? Keep it relevant and sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
Do most teams have a Ring of Honor inductee every year? I wonder. I don't know that this needs to be an annual thing. And here's why I say that, is that you catch up. You realize, you know what? This process of having fans vote for players that we think should be in our Ring of Honor is maybe going too slow. And maybe we need to change our balloting system for a year and say, okay, fans, if you think these players should be in the Ring of Honor, vote yes or no. And you go through all of your guys. They're going to be 12 players in. You said there's going to be 7 players left after this year. You got 7 players left. Treat it like a Hall of Fame vote, right? Yes or no. If you hit 80% for these guys, put them in. Catch up. Do right by your guys that came before and honor their legacy. And then you can start to think about, what are our rules for introducing quote unquote modern players into the process? The Geno Atkins, the Andrew Whitworths, and the players that have played in those eras. AJ Green, when do those players? TJ Hushmanzada, is he a guy that is even considered? I mean, that would be the same time as Chad. So what's the process then for bringing in these modern players? And then what's your goal from a bottom line perspective for the Ring of Honor? Are you treating this like a marketing thing? Are you using this to sell tickets? Or are you using this to honor the legacy of your players that came before? And the answer to that question should also determine your approach here. And I think that they're talking about sustainability of it. And I think they probably do want this to be an every year thing. They're probably looking at it and thinking, okay, we're going to get 3 more years after this year. And then we're going to have to think about adding players, or maybe we have to think about adding players to make sure that we have this going. And maybe you have to go down to 1 player a year so we can keep this going for a decade or 2 decades or 3 decades. But I think, as we've talked about with some of these guys, you got to think about where they are in life too. And I think that that's got to light a fire under your butt in some way, shape, or form to make sure that you're not doing posthumous inductions into your Ring of Honor, or doing it where guys can't even enjoy that honor at that point in their life. And so I do think that's important for them to figure out. And I hope that's part of the calculus when they figure out what changes they're trying to implement for the relevancy and sustainability of the Ring of Honor process.
Yeah, that's what scares me, because I don't think it needs to be every year. I don't. And I agree with that. And at the same time, there would be so much urgency. Like every time I think about the Ring of Honor, I think about the old guys, the guys that, like, I want them to enjoy it, getting in, Ken Riley being celebrated there on the field, like that. Like he gets into the Hall of Fame and all of these things. And it's like, oh, well, Ken Riley II is the one that's right. And that stinks. Like I want the guy that did that achieved everything that he achieved to be celebrated. And that's why I think Dave Lapham's going to get in. 2, I love that because I think it's going to be an awesome celebration and it's going to be well-deserved.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing with Lamar Parrish. I think those are the 2 that are going to get in. I think Brooks will finish 3rd in votes. That's just a prediction. But let's just say that happens. Well, then next year, if they say, we're going to go every 4 years, and they don't do what you said to get these guys in, well, now Bob Trumpy is you're really freaking pushing it with Bob Trumpy from and I'm not even saying like life-death standpoint. I'm saying just like physically, like able to enjoy what Ring of Honor is. Because most of the time it is going to be prime time. It's not going to be 1 o'clock. Most of the time it is going to be a whole celebration once there's a dinner and everything like that the night before the game and all of those things. Like all of that is there's a lot to it. And you want them to be able to enjoy every second of it. And that's where it comes in. So I do wonder, by the way, let's say Lap doesn't get in. Then he enters that conversation next year. It's like, all right, well, when are you going to celebrate this guy? He's grinding for you and doing all of these things that he does from a broadcast standpoint for the organization. So it's tough. I don't know if there's a perfect way. I do think there's a way to get it done and figure it out. And maybe it's the way you said, but like, what if you do that, the 80%, and then Bob Trumpy gets 79? Like,
well, and then you probably have to treat it like the Hall of Fame does, and these guys return to the ballot until they miss it so many times or finally make it or something like that. But I mean, it's not easy.
It's tough.
I do think that is again, to underscore, like, I think it's awesome that the Bengals are doing this, that they are catching up, that they've done 2 players a year. Like I think we're saying, I don't think a lot of teams have a new inductee every year. You don't have, if you've been doing this for a long time, you won't necessarily have a player to put in every year. It's not every year you have an AJ Green to put in, or an Andrew Whitworth, or the Geno Atkins. Like all these guys that were pretty surefire Ring of Honor, at least in my mind, those guys are. You don't necessarily have those guys every year, but you compare, the Ken Riley situation to when when Willie Anderson got in, or when Chad Johnson got in, and what that moment meant to those guys. You could see how much they appreciated it on field. And, Anthony Munoz in that same conversation, right? Like those guys that are representatives of the team in so many ways, despite no longer playing for the team. Anthony Munoz obviously still working in the broadcast area in the preseason, but the difference is just so significant in getting this done in a prompt fashion. And so catching up is probably my first priority. I don't know if it's a Bengals priority. I would love to see that if they do it. I love that they're doing it in general, just to be abundantly clear about that. But I do find it interesting that they're talking about reevaluating the process based on where they're at now with 12 players after this year, or 12 people, including Brown being in the Ring of Honor.
Find a way to get some of the old guys in so they can have their moment, and all of the old guys in, really, and then slow play it. That would be my hope. That's why I wasn't in on Corey. Corey's in his 40s. Corey can wait a little bit. You can wait, Corey. And he got in and he had his moment. Great. At some point, we're going to have a Marvin Lewis conversation. You mentioned AJ Green. Well, Andy Dalton was the one throwing him passes. He's going to get up there. I mean, there are guys. Leon Hall is a prime Ring of Honor candidate.
Yeah.
Like there are guys that people don't think about that are certainly going to be. So you can slow play it with guys that are even in their 60s, like Marvin, fine. But come on now. Like you got to get get some of these guys in, hopefully. And by the way, Marvin is one of those that slow play it some, but at some point here, maybe at the 10-year anniversary, maybe in 2029, like it happens fast, man. So hopefully they figure out the right solution. But you're right. Everything that they've done to get to this point is awesome. The metaphorical Ring of Honors. I remember writing something in 2020 about that, doing videos on it. And thank goodness we're here. It's a huge step. But hopefully whatever changes they make ensure that guys like Bob Trumpy and Reggie Williams, who I really don't think have a realistic shot of being inducted this year. I don't. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm judging what I've seen. I don't think either one are going to get in this year, but they clearly deserve to get in. They've had their health issues. Find a way to get those guys in soon.
We'll have plenty to talk about in the remaining episodes this week. Just a reminder, if you're still here at the end of the episode, that means you're probably a loyal listener. Or maybe that's just what everybody does. I'll just tell myself that.
Everybody.
Make sure you are aware that right now, until about a week before training camp, we're down to a 3 days a week schedule here on Locked On Bengals. So look for episodes on Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday afternoon to evening range is where those episodes will be up. And of course, if something breaking happens, we'll have that covered as quickly as we can. So Trey Hendrickson news, Shamar Stewart news, perhaps, depending on what the news is, we'll make sure that we're available at the drop of a hat if those things happen. But just want to get that regular publishing schedule available and out there in case you missed our most recent episode. So we've got a little bit more football to talk about with the conclusion of the offseason program with mandatory minicamp. And then we'll have that break where the players and coaches will take their little break before training camp. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.